My name is Dr. Vishal Talwar. I'm the Dean for the School of Management at the BML Munjal University. At the same time, I am also part of the Innovation Entrepreneurship initiative, right? Today is actually a good day for us to be able to have an interaction and discuss a lot of changes that are actually taking place as far as the careers are concerned, a lot of changes that are actually taking place as far as jobs are concerned. And to give you a brief understanding of what I am, for about 12 years, I was in the UK. Hello, Swati ma'am. I was someone who actually went to the UK for my PhD in management at the Manchester Business School. Good evening. At the same time, I then moved on, after I finished my PhD, I moved on to the London School of Economics. That's where I was at the Department of Management. And of course, somewhere around 2013, after I finished a stint with the Henley Business School, I then decided to come back to India because there was a calling and I wanted to be part of the institution building process in India. And of course, I also wanted to be a part of the educational, what I would call as revolution in India. Now, it's been a good six and a half years for me. Currently, I'm based in Gurgaon at the BML Munjal University. And I have been, I've had the pleasure to actually interact with, so many faculty from different parts of the world, so many students from different parts of the world. And I think a lot of things that are kind of changing, currently have a bearing on not only the students, their parents, but at the same time, a bearing on us as educators or us as people who are part of or stakeholders within this whole setup. So today, I'll be talking a little bit around the future jobs and careers that you can expect. Maybe I'll set a bit of a context, maybe just to ask you, how are you feeling in the midst of this lockdown? I know that it's been, more than 2 months now? It's been more than 2 months. What are your thoughts, just to get a perspective? Are you concerned about future careers? Are you a parent? Are you a counselor? Are you a faculty? Are you a teacher? Are you a principal? Right? Are you worried about careers going forward? Are you worried about the kind of jobs that your students or everybody else will see or will compete in? So it's important for us to maybe start with that. Maybe just a few thoughts. If you could just write on the chat, what are your thoughts on this? What is it that you would are thinking about? What concerns do you actually have? For yourselves, for your sons and daughters, for the students, what's in store for us for the next few years? Okay. Of course, we've been hearing about the whole thing around the automation. We've been hearing about this whole thing around artificial intelligence, around technology, around disruption. What does it mean to us? What does it mean to people like you and me, who are essentially living a life and of course, at the same time, trying to balance a livelihood. Okay, so what will the jobs in the future look like? And these are things that maybe we will be talking about. Let me tell you, the underlying theme, of course, is change, right? The underlying theme is change simply because of the fact that change is the inevitable reality, right? We obviously are within the Industrial Revolution 4.0. You may have heard of the fact that we are in I 4.0. Right, we are in the fourth industrial revolution. The first industrial revolution was when we, I guess, invented the steam engine and we commercialized it around the 1800s, 1850s. Thereafter was this whole idea of mass production, where you had cars that were being mass produced somewhere in the beginning of 1900s. Thereafter, in the 60s and the 70s was the third industrial revolution, wherein a lot of microchips, computerization actually took place. And now we are within the Industry 4.0 scenario, wherein there's certain key changes. Remember this whole idea of job losses, this whole idea of career changes, this whole idea of trepidation, this whole idea of ki kya hoga, at a later stage. A lot of this has always been existing in every industrial revolution. Okay, and automatically those kind of fears, those kind of uncertain thoughts in people's minds have existed. And of course, many a time with some changes, with some reskilling, the fact is every industrial revolution has brought with it a lot of career opportunities, has brought with it a lot of different kind of roles that people have done. Right? Think about the kind of jobs that don't exist today. Right? Yesterday I was thinking about, having a conversation with you, and I thought about, what are the jobs that, actually don't exist today? And I wonder if you can think about some examples. I can think of, the telephone exchange operator, right? The telephone exchange operator, which, at least about 20, 25 years back, if you had relatives, let's say, living in Canada, right, you used to call up and, somebody on the lines used to say, there's a call for you from, a certain person. And, at the end of 3 minutes, that person used to tell you, do you want to continue or not? Or, so that is something that is not a very familiar reality anymore. At the same time, there used to be people, the videotape sellers, right? They used to come with their bags to everybody's homes, and automatically they used to come along and sell the videotapes or rent the videotapes, to you. Then you, of course, had the film projector wallahs. I'm sure in some locations, certain parts of India, the film projector people, sitting back and then projecting the film on the screen is definitely a reality. But the fact is that it's not as common as we, may think it to be. And then, of course, and this is something interesting that I came up with, this whole idea of a human radar, right? There used to be a human radar before the times of the radars became very, very commonplace. Obviously, radars are used to be able to detect, flight movement, aircraft movement, where is it exactly? And of course, it's used by all control towers. But there used to be human radars before, actual radars with self ability came in to the picture. So the fact is, a lot of jobs existed. A lot of jobs or careers got evaporated. Were diminished in their importance or completely obliterated. Of course, this has happened to companies as well. Okay, so if you look at organizations, let's say the Xerox company, the Kodak. I'll talk a little bit about Xerox and Kodak. I'll talk about the fact that change has happened to those organizations as well. The fact is that this change many a times is not necessarily an intrinsic change. Okay, it is a change that has been brought about because there's a lot of dynamic changes that have existed all across the world, the way we're seeing this right now. A lot of people say that the economic fundamentals of the countries all over the world were fine, but the fact is that we're still staring at an economic recession, and that's something that is because of external changes. Similarly, when you look at industries, in a lot of industries, you have people from the outside of the industry coming in and automatically changing the dynamics of those industries. The biggest example that comes to my mind, of course, is the iPhone, right? Is the mobile telephony industry. At the same time, if you look at the digital camera industry, and that's where I talk about Kodak, the reality is that Kodak were the ones who actually manufactured, who actually invented the digital camera. Okay, but they decided not necessarily to carry on with the digital camera or commercialize the digital camera for whatever reasons, right? They were obviously having 90% of the market, okay, with the old film-based camera. They decided to carry on with it and move on, and didn't necessarily develop the digital camera too much, okay? What you also have to remember is that, of course, during that time in the 70s and the early 80s, you didn't have the internet, you didn't have digital technologies, you didn't have social media. So automatically the relevance of digital camera did come along as soon as people were able to share this, share their photographs, share their memories and what have you. Of course, there are brands in India which don't exist anymore. The companies, if you look at the Hindustan Motors Ambassador, something which was on the streets in India for a long time and don't exist, anymore. Campo Cola is another example that I can think of, right? Campo Cola, Campo Orange, these were all very, very common realities when we look at, the brand horizon in India per se. Okay, HMT watches, right? Hindustan Machine Tool, the watches, right? These are all examples. If I go deeper into the details of why this change happens, remember every few years there is what is known as a creative destruction process. Okay, there's something called creative destruction. It's actually Schumpeter's concept of creative destruction, which means every few years there's always some sense of change, very radical change that happens in industry. You see that happening in the education sector right now. You see that happening with a lot of schools, a lot of universities, a lot of colleges are actually moving online. Okay. This is, of course, something that the universities, colleges, higher education institutions, schools will have to look at and cope with going forward. Is this an irreversible trend? Of course, only time will tell. But the fact is, when we move from textiles to railways to automotive revolution, to computers, now, nanotech and whatever, right? These are all, right, phases or waves of creative destruction that happens to every industry. And of course, why am I talking about this? The reason why I'm saying this is because someone very, very famous in the world, Jack Welch, he's mentioned if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. What that basically means is that, change will happen. It's more about whether we align with that change that matters a great deal. We can shape things, right? We can actually lead, we can pioneer, we can go with the trend, we can equip ourselves, we can strengthen ourselves. A lot of these things depends entirely on what is it that we would like to do when this change actually nears us. Once again, if you look at the origins of Apple and Microsoft, right? If you look at both these, great companies, right? Disruptive companies that have actually changed things a great deal, right? A lot of them, both these organizations have a lot to thank a company like Xerox for. Xerox had actually, through their, Palo Alto research center, in the Silicon Valley, had actually developed, right, the graphical user interface, what we nowadays use, these Windows 10 or whatever we actually use, these are all graphic user interfaces. It's so much easier to work on computers right now simply because of the fact that there is a user interface involved. I don't know, some of you, if you remember, the DOS operating systems or whatever, right? And we used to write some code and something used to come up and the floppy disk used to have, memory of 1.44 MB. We're far away from that kind of scenario anymore. So the fact is, Xerox were the people who actually, created the graphical user interface. They created the mouse, right? They actually created the laser printer. But Xerox, for whatever reasons, they had a very good system of creativity. They had a very good system of a lot of good researchers who were there with them in Silicon Valley, right? But the fact is, a lot of decision making was happening 3,000 miles away, sitting in New York. And automatically, the whole research center and the communication with, the headquarters based in New York was somehow, may not have aligned. They may not have seen the benefits of a lot of these products that existed. Of course, somebody like Steve Jobs, who went across over there, he went across to, Xerox for the first time in the Palo Alto Research Center in 1979. He saw the graphical user interface for the first time and he got completely enamored by it. He got completely he realized that this is actually going to change a lot of things. And of course, these were the kind of people who then built up on this. So this is what the reason why I'm talking about all this is because obviously change happens. If I talk a little bit more about Steve Jobs, he's someone who also been in India. I think he spent about 7-8 months in India in the 70s or the 80s, somewhere around then. He had a guru called Neem Karoli Baba in Uttarakhand somewhere, right? And of course got inspired. Right. And if I look at the origins of this whole idea of, can I fuse functionality of the phone or the functionality of design with the aesthetics of design, I think, one of his influences on this was this whole idea of spirituality, this whole idea of, Zen Buddhism, or even, in India with the various religious orientations he must have been exposed to, right? Now, of course, a lot of established organizations, these are, many times they are not able to see the trend. They're not necessarily able to see what's in store for them. And of course, things change, right? Now, if I look at the kind of roles that you can expect in the future, and the reason why I'm talking about this is because I just want to give you a context once again. Now, this context is about this whole idea of exponential technology. So there's something called exponential technologies, right? So when we talk about things such as, artificial intelligence, when we talk about things such as, machine learning, when we talk about robotics, when we talk about automation, when we talk about, Internet of Things, right? When we talk about drones, for example, Okay, these are all elements of what is known as exponential technologies. Why do we call them exponential? Because they seemingly have a very good capability to completely transform how we do things. Okay, so if you look at artificial intelligence, if you look at machine learning, I'll get into a little bit more detail later, because this is very much linked to what is it that we see going forward and how it will shape careers. Okay, so one piece is the automation piece, right? One piece is this whole idea of technology, its usage, its advent, and its integration with a lot of things that are happening right now all across the world, okay, including in India. At the same time, it's about this whole idea of the pandemic that we're currently facing. And this is the reason why I talked about the pandemic, or I talked about COVID-19 earlier, is because a lot of this will actually change things for us. Okay, so if I look at the various sectors that are currently being affected, right, the tourism and hospitality is majorly affected, because obviously you're not traveling, and it's expected to recover not later than Q4 of this particular financial year, right, which means way into 2021, right. Aviation, airlines, of course. The fact is that airlines have started again with you must have come across of images of people traveling with PPP equipment, and they're almost looking like astronauts, right. But the fact is that airlines have started. But what is important for us to consider now is the consumer confidence. What is important for us to consider is, does the passenger have the confidence in his mind to be able to take tours, to be able to travel for business, for example, to be able to travel for even pleasure, different places. So I think it's not about the fact that an infrastructure is available. It's not about the fact that airlines are not flying. It is about whether me as a consumer, me as a parent, me as a purchaser of something, I have the confidence to be able to make certain decisions, which will then have a knock-on effect on a lot of things that will become relevant and a lot of things that will become irrelevant. Good evening, everyone. I think people are writing right now. If you have any questions at the moment, please feel free to write, to me. I can start answering them as we go along in this conversation that we're having. Right. Oil and gas, of course, when people are not using the cars too much, it will become a problem. Automotive sector is supposed to, rebound because of the fact that a lot of people may prefer personal transportation. Right. That's what they're saying. What they're saying is that a lot of people, because of safety reasons, health reasons, might actually prefer, the safe confines of their own transportation, whether that be a two-wheeler, whether that be a four-wheeler. So maybe, the automotive sector might actually bounce back. At the same time, you realize that the basic consumer products have all bounced back. Amazon is now delivering a lot of non-essential products as well, right? There will be potential winners. Remember, why am I talking about this within the context of the careers is because there will be some sectors that have been given a major boost because of what we are currently facing. You must have heard of Zoom, right? Of course, we right now on Facebook Live, but you must have heard of Zoom, communications. Zoom communications valuation currently is more than the valuation of the top 4 airlines right now in the world. Okay, so that tells you about a sudden change in the environment, and all of a sudden everybody started using Zoom, everybody started using these technologies to be able to communicate with the rest of the world, and automatically, these are obviously potential winners. You also see other potential winners as well. You see, information communication technology in general. A lot of people might, since they're working from home, will lead to a scenario wherein people will tend to work from home, go less to their offices. At the same time, medical infrastructure, medical supply, healthcare infrastructure, right? These are areas will definitely, do better, are supposed to do better. E-commerce is supposed to do better. Personal healthcare is supposed to do better. Food processing and retail, maybe in the e-commerce format, is also supposed to do better. But I think it's more important for us to understand, how will we be able to ensure the migrants coming back into work as quickly as possible, how we are able to ensure, the reduction of cash flow pressures that exist right now across the industry. because obviously revenue is something that a lot of companies, small and medium enterprises, large enterprises have not been able to generate in the last 2.5 months. And automatically, that is something that will also have to be addressed. Okay, and of course, there will be some long-term behavior changes. You may have come across scenarios wherein a lot of social distancing norms are being practiced, people are, separated. What does it lead to in terms of psychology? What does it lead to in terms of behavior is something that we need to see. But the fact is that there's certain dynamic changes that will happen, right? And in the process, there'll be certain jobs. There's a collective response that we have to be able to provide. You see a lot of people in India leading from the front, ensuring that things hopefully get back to normal as quickly as possible, because now it's about lives and livelihood. And that's something that needs to be balanced. Okay. Now, how will all this shape up, right? How will all this look going forward? It largely depends on what kind of recovery patterns will we have. It depends on whether we have a U-shaped recovery, which means that the system, the GDP, the gross domestic product goes down, right? Stays there for some time, and then after that it goes back again. So that's a U-shaped recovery. Some people obviously are hoping for a V-shaped recovery. V-shaped recovery, and it bounces back very, very quickly. Okay. And of course, some people say it could be a Nike-shaped recovery, wherein, if you know the Nike logo, the logo is a little like, if you try and recollect what the logo looks like, people are saying that's the kind of, growth we should be expecting. Of course, these are all theories. It largely depends on how the private industry looks at, making investments, looks at generating employment, looks at hiring more people, looks at, working along with the governments, whether that be state or the center, to ensure a lot of things, right? The government has obviously a role to play to ensure that things are getting back on track. And of course, a lot of these packages have been announced all across the world to be able to do that. What you also have to remember is the future work trend. Okay, there's obviously an increasing acceptance of remote working styles, right? It's not just about the fact that people from the IT sector or the BPO sector are actually working from home. It's board members working from home. It's the CEOs working from home. It's people at all levels working from home. White collar essentially. Of course, from a blue collar worker perspective, it's not possible every time to be able to work from home because they have to be in the factories to be able to produce and manufacture. So automatically, that is right now a bit of a setback. Hopefully, that will be back to normal. But the fact is that once a lot of changes happen in the mindset, a lot of changes happen in people working from home, this might become permanent. This leads to a situation wherein maybe the space that you require for office purposes might actually go down. This then might have an impact on real estate prices. It might have an impact on big office spaces. It might have an impact on maybe co-working spaces and what have you, right? And of course, you also have to remember that highly skilled workers would have more probability of working from home now. Right, this whole concept of 33% of the workforce going on certain days, 33% of the workforce going on other days. Of course, remember, if I link this up to economics, if I link this up to financial projections, if you're able to complete a lot of tasks based from home, you may not require that level of real estate, that scope of real estate, right? What it does to your work-life balance, what it does to the home dynamics is something that is not that easy, of course, right? But the fact is that there'll be certain changes. What you also have to remember is that there's something called the gig economy, right? The gig economy essentially is wherein people from this part of the world or people from other parts of the world are working along or working on projects, short-term projects, medium-term projects with other people. Right, so you could possibly design a logo, you could possibly design an advertising campaign, you could design some kind of an animation, right? All this by people who are not necessarily employed by you, not necessarily based in your own country either, okay? But of course have the skill sets to be able to contribute to you, right? That's why you see a lot more remote working happening. You see a lot more people, adding value to themselves or adding to their incomes by being able to contribute to this kind of the economy. A lot more will happen in that regard. Now, whether that happens because of a certain rationalization of salaries, whether that happens because of the fact that these are other sources of being able to demonstrate your skill sets, well, only time will tell. What you also have to remember is that this whole idea of virtual teams, this whole idea of working virtually with people you may or may not see very regularly or frequently, will also lead to a new style of leadership. Okay, it will require a new style of approaching, getting work done, being able to mentor the teams together, get them to work for a cause. It's not that easy. It's not that easy when people are spread across different parts of the country. It's not very easy to ensure motivation, right? So it will require a lot of things. Now, coming to specific aspects of the career, I'll spend a little bit of time on what aspects of the career. What could you possibly expect? What kind of job roles could you expect going forward? As I mentioned earlier, it's this whole concept of the effect of exponential technologies, right? We've already seen the launch of smart products, smart services. You've seen Internet of Things. If you're wearing a Fitbit, right, or if you are essentially having a Netflix at home, if you are having one of those devices, the Google devices or the Alexas or whatever else, where you can talk to them. These are all examples of new age products. Okay, but remember, these are also examples of the ability of these products to generate a lot of information and data about context, about people, about personalities, about your activities, about your behaviors, about your opinions as well. Okay, so if you take the example of Netflix knows very well your TV watching pattern. You can watch whenever you would like to watch it. You can stop it whenever you would like to stop it. It understands the patterns of when you like to watch what kind of programs, right? So it is able to understand your behavior over a period of time. Okay, and similarly, all these other devices that we see, a lot of these apps that we engage with, right, are also essentially, being able to generate a lot of information about you. Obviously, this information could be used to be able to produce better products, could be used to be able to produce better services, create designs that are more amenable to your needs. Okay, but that's this whole concept of products and services. Of course, now if you notice, you must have heard about a lot of things such as contactless retail. You must have heard about contactless supply chains. Okay, the big challenge, if you've seen on television, right, the way television is now, you would have seen ads, even by, the pizza people, you'll see ads by a lot of other people who are essentially telling you that, look, we'll deliver to your doorstep without touching the product too much. It's contactless. Don't worry. It's all safe and what have you. Okay. At the same time, automotive manufacturers, for example, are also trying to figure out, look, what do I do? How do I digitize the path to purchase? How do I ensure that my dealers of cars or motorbikes are also digitized? How do I ensure the various aspects of the value chain that I have? Right from the time that I'm sourcing raw material for my creation of my products in the factory till the time that product actually goes to your doorstep, how can I ensure the entire integration, from a digital perspective? Okay, so automatically that will lead to a lot of changes. Right. Similarly, business innovations. Right. So if you look at the Olas of the world, the Ubers of the world, if you look at Airbnb, you look at a lot of these models. Right. These are essentially business innovation models. Okay, and automatically they're aggregators who help you, with choice, who help you make decisions, and at the same time they ease the whole process of getting the product available to you. Okay, remember at the same time it's also about the demand for resourceful planet and sustainability. Okay, so what you have to remember is that going forward, why is there attraction for electric vehicles? Why is there attraction? In fact, today itself, I read about Ola Electric acquiring a particular company in Europe. Okay, and it's an electric, I don't know much detail because there's a little glimpse that I had about it, but they've acquired something in Europe. So what that means is that a lot of focus is on the electric, revolution per se. Similarly, there's a lot of thought around, how do I ensure that the planet is sustainable? How do I ensure that the resources are sustainable as well? These are all areas that will definitely play a role in your careers going forward. Right, new work arrangements that I talked about. So these new work arrangements are things that will also determine the kind of careers that are shaping up, in the longer term. Okay, so when we hear about blockchain, when we hear about energy storage, when we hear about this whole concept of miniaturization, okay, obviously technology exists to be able to miniaturize something. Okay, to give you an example, nowadays some companies are able to provide you oxygen at your home, so you can have a 5-liter capacity, a 10-liter capacity oxygen chamber, or whatever you want to call it, and they are able to actually supply you maybe oxygen because maybe there's deficiency in the Indian kind of context, possibly. Okay, so this is miniaturization. This is miniaturization of industrial technology, because wherein you provide oxygenation at much more massive scales in industry, so you miniaturize this. Okay, now the big difference that we see right now, as far as this whole concept of what I talked about, what is the biggest difference that we are facing at the moment with respect to the fourth industrial revolution? Okay, we are in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution. What's the big difference? The first 3 industrial revolutions were essentially around this whole idea of helping me and you do work better. Right, so whether it's the steam engine in the first industrial revolution, right, whether it is the production of cars in the second industrial revolution, whether it was computerization in the third industrial revolution, these were all enabling a mechanism, adding muscle or mechanization to what people did. Okay, now of course, if you wanted to kind of dig a ditch somewhere or a hole somewhere, you needed a kind of machine. So it was helping you build something or create something. Now the bigger issue is something that we had thought about in this whole concept in the 1950s. We had thought about straight from, let's say, Isaac Asimov's science fiction novels, was, can machines think? Okay, so there was this whole idea that can machines actually think? And automatically in the last many years, we have come to a scenario wherein we've enabled this whole concept of machines thinking for themselves as well. Of course, I'm not saying that it is evolved. I'm not saying that it has reached its maximum. I'm not saying it is efficient and effective at the moment. But remember that if I link up this whole concept of how machines could think for themselves, okay, they could possibly give you certain decisions to make. They could give you different alternatives. Right? Machines can also go through a lot of many legal cases, artificial intelligence, you've heard of something else as well. All these are ways and means by which we are not necessarily always required to help that machine make a decision or help that machine process information. Okay, so what that basically means is this whole idea of whether the machines require us to be able to process something is also a bit of a question. Okay, something that we have to think about. So what's the big difference with Industry 4.0, right? The big difference obviously is in this fourth industrial revolution is that machines are actually learning to do something. Okay, you must have heard of chatbots, you must have heard of bots and whatever else. Sometimes you hear that, maybe I'm not talking to a human being, maybe I'm talking to a machine. And of course it is obviously a reality. Okay, they're not necessarily scripted to be doing something. You're not giving them a script. Okay, it's quite possible that the script is being generated as work is carrying on. So this is the big fundamental difference. Now, if I link up this whole idea of artificial intelligence, big data, machine learning, Internet of Things, and I combine it with, let's say biochemistry, right? If I combine the both together, we are already, in some quarters trying to rewrite this whole God's instruction manual, right? So when we talk about genomes and when we talk about genetic editing, essentially what are we doing here? We are essentially being able to engineer even life per se. Of course, once again, very primitive, very early stages, but it's already out there. I was reading some information in news which said that maybe by 2040 death will be optional, right? But the sad reality is maybe most of us who are right now in this particular session may not have the advantage of wanting to choose how long we want to live. But I believe people living, who were born 2011 and post, may have the capacities or the capability to be able to decide for themselves about the length of, maybe they want to live longer. Of course, they could possibly, scientists and, whoever have research scientists could possibly help them in this regard. Okay, so I wouldn't want to get into, major details about this. It's already happening. The biggest thing that we have to consider right now is this whole idea of meaningful careers, right? We've got to start thinking about meaningful careers rather than just a job. Okay, the fact is that we should not be thinking about us as institutions and universities or schools or anybody in the education firmament in trying to think that am I giving them a job or maybe I'm trying to make them live a life. I think the irony is that nowadays we might have 5,000 friends on Facebook, but it's quite possible that we're not able to manage one particular relationship either. Okay, so that's that's at times the irony of this whole thing. What you also have to remember is that the automation process will affect many different areas. Manufacturing, it'll affect transportation, it'll affect agriculture, it'll affect retail, it'll affect construction, it'll affect finance, right? So if you are someone who's thinking about a finance career, or if somebody close to you is thinking about a finance career, I think you have to keep adding value to yourselves. Right? It's not just about being able to do the right kind of balance sheet. It's not just about ensuring that you can do a profit loss statement. Okay, but because the fact is that automation will be able to enable a process wherein a machine could also do an effective job in creating those things. Right? What is it beyond that you're able to offer? That's fundamentally important. Okay, so these are just ideas. Automation will have an effect on educational services, right? Education services in a lot of ways, in the mentoring process, the placement process, the admissions process. A lot of these things will get automated going forward. Okay, so what are the kind of future job roles that you might expect, right? Coming to the point about the kind of job roles that you might expect. If I look at marketing, that is an area which will definitely require people with different kind of capabilities. You might have people who are neuro A/B testers, right? You must have heard of something called neurology. You must have heard of something also called neuromarketing. Okay, so many a times nowadays you're looking at brain, scans. You're looking at how people react to situations, how people react to products in a store, and essentially that kind of understanding is being created through understanding your brain scans, for example. Right. So the fact is that you have to, as a marketing person, you have to know your domain knowledge. You have to know your domain specificity, right? The conceptual capability, the practical capability of marketing, for example. But at the same time, you also have to be able to be very comfortable in technology. You also have to be able to be very comfortable in data. You also have to be able to be comfortable in how data is being given to you, how you process it, how you make decisions based on the data that is there. Okay. Are you being able to see my video? I wonder if you're, Ananta, are you being able to see my video? I think it suddenly disappeared from the screen, but I'll carry on regardless, right? So at the same time, what you also have to remember is that there might be people like algorithm bias auditors, right? You might have need for algorithm bias auditors, who are essentially people who are writing algorithms. So remember, when you are designing programs, when you're designing a machine to be able to work in a certain manner, let's say, for example, you're designing a machine to read certain information, many a times you create algorithm, okay? And algorithms might have a bias, right? How do you remove this bias, right? How does, bias can come because of language, bias can come because of cultural differences, bias can also come because of the fact that my understanding of a situation may not be exactly the same. So, machines have to be taught that. How do you do that? I think that's fundamentally something that is important. Once again, it requires you to have marketing knowledge, but at the same time, being comfortable in tech, being comfortable in software, understanding. Remember, nobody's telling you to have amazing levels of software programming capability, right? But you have to be able to be comfortable, especially when you are making decisions. Okay. Similarly, you might have machine personality designers. Okay, machines have personalities going forward as well. They'll have a certain kind of personality, right? You always keep hearing about introversion, extroversion, whatever, in the context of what we are. But the fact is that, when you are designing machines to kind of ape certain processes that humans do, you will have to be able to design personalities for them too. Okay, so this is about marketing. At the same time, if I look at, let's say, information technology, right? If I look at that industry, or as a whole, right? I mean, I'm not necessarily being specific to any particular kind of, IT services. You might require people who are, robotic process automation developers. Okay, you might have people who are, 3D design engineers. Okay, these are people you would definitely need to have with you, right? At the same time, you might require cloud architects, right? You might require VFX people. You might require animators. A lot of these people, are definitely going to have, an upward movement or an upward traction as far as the whole concept of careers and jobs are concerned. Right. Similarly, if I look at, let's say, the banking, and the financial services sector, right, there might be, cybersecurity specialists. So you would need cybersecurity specialists simply because of the humongous nature of the data, the sensitivity of the data, right? So you might need people to be able to protect that. Similarly, you'll have credit analyst people. Once again, people who are able to analyze a lot of information, whether it's credit information, whether it's customer details, customer behavior analysis. A lot of this would be very, very important. Similarly, you might need blockchain architects. Okay, so blockchain is something that has gained prominence, and of course, blockchain has its usage across industries as well. Okay, you might require people who are process modeling experts. What's the process? How do you model the process? How is the process more efficient? How can I make the process more efficient? Remember, these kind of people are not just required in banking or financial services. They're of course also required slightly in a different kind of format, even let's say in the automotive sector. Similarly, you will have forensic analyst people. Okay, now who are forensic analysts? We've always heard about forensic analysts from a crime perspective, right? But at the same time, what you also have to remember is forensic analysts are also people who are required, let's say, in finance consulting, are required in trying to understand frauds or whatever else, looking at a lot of information data, trying to figure out what's right, what's not right, what's ethical, what's not ethical. Okay. Similarly, if I look at the automotive sector will also have analytics experts. Remember, there's masses of information that is being created. There's a lot of big data that is being generated. There's a lot of footprints that are there present in how, when you're doing certain activities, when you are essentially demonstrating certain behavior, when you're using certain products. As I talked to you earlier, you are creating a lot of information. This information could possibly be used for once again designing better products, creating better marketing programs. Okay, so automotive industry people might also require this. Okay, now at the same time, what you also have to remember is that automotive industry themselves will not just be about the hardware going forward. Okay, so it's just not about the cars. With the self-driving revolution, with the fact that automotive or cars may not just be about having the hardware, having a physical car, but it's also about the software that you put into it. To give you an example here, when MG Hector launched, what were they talking about? They were essentially talking about this concept of the internet inside. Right? As technology improves, the software, may be equally important, maybe more important. So you'll see a lot of very different collaborations that are happening even in the automotive sector. Right? So if you look at the nature of collaboration, nowadays automotive companies or car companies are not necessarily just collaborating with each other. You have IT companies collaborating with the automotive companies as well. You have, very different, very niche technology disruptors also collaborating there as well. Okay, so when you're not driving your car in the future, right, what would you be doing? Obviously, there's a lot of focus on what is it that you'll be doing at that time, whether it's entertainment, whether it's something else, okay, communication. You would require machine learning based cyber security experts. You would require, alternative propulsion engineers. Okay, so remember, it's not just about fuel, gas. It's not just about petrol or diesel, but it's also about alternative fuels. You need those kind of engineers going forward. Okay, of course, what I was talking about earlier, autonomous vehicle engineers, right? Those are people that you would obviously require. Once again, not just with hardware capability, but also having a software orientation to themselves. Similarly, medicine, that's one area that will definitely, see a lot of change. Okay, we've already talked, listening to people talking about robotic surgeries, listening to people talking about, a doctor or, a fantastic doctor doing a surgery from one part of the world to a patient who maybe is in another part of the world. Right, automatically you're seeing a lot of maybe 3D printing technology that is actually coming into, healthcare as well. Okay. At the same time, you might require augmented reality experts, right? Augmented reality experts are, if you must have come across augmented reality on your phones, you might play a game, you might, put your mobile phone in front of a poster and all of a sudden the poster comes alive, right? The fact is that kind of technology or that kind of know-how can be used even in medicine, okay, to be able to, view things, to be able to look at, organs or whatever. Right. Similarly, you might need people who are, virtual hospital managers. Okay. Of course, going forward, I'm sure as we focus a lot more on building better infrastructure, this whole concept of, telemedicines or telecounseling at least would definitely gain some importance. People will start looking at this in more detail, also because of the fact that, there is a certain equilibrium difference across, certain parts of the country have amazing health infrastructure, whereas others may not. So how do you kind of balance the both? Okay. You might have genetic counselors as well, right? People who are able to give you a lot of advice on, genes and how that has an effect. And, in the longer term, a lot of other things that I was talking about earlier might also be a reality when you're looking at, this whole concept of editing the genes or whatever. Okay, so these are all things that I wanted to talk to you about: jobs, careers, what you might see going forward within the various sectors, right? What are the implications, right? The implications are that, the quantitative and data analysis capability would definitely be important, okay? But remember, it's not just about the world of the future or, the next 10, 15, 20, 30, whatever years is about people with multidimensional skills. Yes, you would need specialists, right? But at the same time, you would also need people who are very happy to make decisions, would also need people who are very happy and comfortable with not only themselves, but also other people around them. Okay. Similarly, you would need people not only who have a good amount of knowledge, but also have the capability to communicate that knowledge, to the rest out there. Okay. So basically, it's not just about problem solving, but it's also about problem identification. Many times we talk about the fact that problem solving, yes, is important, but what problem are you trying to solve is also fundamentally very important. Okay. And that's something that we have to be able to build up going forward as academics, as parents, as educators. Okay, so essentially the idea here is that this whole concept of the fuzzy, so the soft factors, a lot of these, the perspective kind of courses are kind of getting integrated, with the tech kind of courses as well. Okay, so fundamentally, these are things that we have to remember. At the same time, being the director of innovation entrepreneurship also at my university, I also believe that a lot of focus has to be given into self-employment, entrepreneurship going forward, because I think fundamentally speaking, yes, more jobs will be created. Fundamentally speaking, there'll be more opportunities out there. But at the same time, what you also have to remember is that we have to move away. Partly we have to move away from this focus on job consumption into job production, and of course the entrepreneurial ecosystem will be quite important for us to develop going forward. Okay, we have to inculcate this whole desire in our students and in kids to be able to be reflect risk-taking behavior or whatever you want to call it. But of course the ecosystem needs to be there. Okay. So what should we be focusing on? Just to summarize, of course, analytical thinking and innovation, active learning, decision making, creativity, complex, problem solving is very, very important. Of course, it's not just about a lot of these things that I've talked about. It's also about leadership and social influence. That's very, very important. Okay, how do you ensure that you are able to take people in a particular direction? Remember, people are not necessarily, in awe of you, and because they're in awe of you, and because they like you, they will, they'll follow you. Right. It's also important to be able to ensure that by following you, they'll be able to achieve their objectives. Right. So these are things that have to be married into this tech orientation that I've been calling. So there's a place for domain knowledge, right? Whether that be biology, whether that be finance, whether that be marketing, whether that be anything. But at the same time, the comfort in tech, right? The ability to make decisions in critical scenarios. That's very, very important. But of course, communication is also fundamentally very, very important. So thank you very much. I think this was, Ananta had given me about 45 minutes. I've kind of gone beyond those 45 minutes. But thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. I'm happy to take any questions that you have, any reflections, anything that you would like to share. Good evening, everyone. I think if you have any queries, if you have any questions, please feel free. This is a good opportunity for me to learn in the process as well. So I'll just wait for about 2 minutes. If there are any particular questions, please feel free. Anything that you would like to talk about, anything that you would like to share, any anecdotes, any cases, right? Anything special about particular areas that you want the students to focus on, anything else on careers or the jobs going forward, please feel free. Good evening, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you very much to Kalorex Group for giving me this opportunity. Thank you to Ananta for giving me this opportunity as well. It's been, this is a new medium for me. I've been used to Zoom, I've been used to WebEx, but I think this is a very exciting medium as well. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming along for this particular session. I found it very useful. It's kind of made me re-engage with a lot of the concepts that I was speaking about. If there are any particular questions, please feel free. So, okay. So I think thank you very much for your time. Hopefully we'll get another chance to connect with each other. I hope this session has been useful. And once again, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, right? Thank you. Bye-bye. Yes, you're right, Ms. Shukla, that there would be a need to rationalize a lot of real estate space. What you also have to remember here is that this is something that will definitely be affected by the crisis, the fact that people are working from home. Right, there's already a sharp reduction in, let's say, valuations, for example. So if you look at the WeWork valuation, right, there was a time when the WeWork valuation was, I think, in the $40 billion or something. I may be wrong, of course, but at the moment the WeWork valuation is about $2 billion something. Of course, a definite a drop. Okay, and definitely something that people have to consider going forward. Right. Of course, it has impact on many other sectors, but definitely it's about the opportunity. It's about this whole concept of capitalizing on this changed world. And I think, we have to be optimistic. We have to take our chances, and we have to be able to ensure certain skill set building within ourselves, as well as the students that we teach, or students, kids that we're parenting as well. Right? It's a different world out there. It's we have to move on to higher levels of the Bloom's taxonomy, and that's something I'm sure a lot of places are actually doing, right? Because that's what fundamentally will differentiate people who are able to capitalize on their opportunities. Yeah. So thank you very much. Absolute pleasure. Thank you. Bye bye. See you.